Hello, hello everyone. Hello. I'm about to start with some From Russia with Love, and like I promised last week, I'm gonna finish up the whole book tonight. Okay. It's how many chapters? There's 6 chapters. It's not too bad, I guess, you know. It might take me like 2 hours to read all of it. But, hey, you gotta suffer for the art, I guess. I don't know. How's everyone doing? I'm drinking out of a clear cup so that way I'm not you know, like spazzing out and shaking all over the place. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and start. We are on chapter 22, Out of Turkey. Oh, and if any of you are wondering about this stuff down here at the bottom, I'm trying to raise some funds to get some sparring gloves because I do not currently have any sparring gloves that are good. And I'm also trying to raise some funds for more like nutrition, as in like supplements and stuff for my training. And if you would like to donate or send me a tribute or anything of that nature, you can go ahead, and I have my little socials here, my face, right there. So you can go ahead and go to that. But now I'll go ahead and start without further delay because I kind of think we have a lot to go through with this story. So, Bond and Tatiana are on their 4-day journey through Turkey or out of Turkey, and they're heading to, I forget where they're going to, but she's trying to go to England pretty much. And they have a 4-day train ride over there. And during those 4 days, Tatiana is supposed to make Bond fall in love with her. And at this moment in time, we have found out that there's a couple of KGB agents on the train, and that might be a problem for old Bond boy. So we're gonna see what happens. And I think they've already been there one night. Yeah, yeah. Previous chapter, in the previous chapter, yeah, they already got on the train, and then it was nighttime, so it was bedtime, and they fell asleep. And now I guess it's the next day. We'll see. Chapter 22, Out of Turkey. And I guess this camera it's not capturing my mouth for some reason. I don't know what's going on. So my mouth might look like it's not moving, but it's fine. The train howled on through the night. Bond sat and watched the hurrying moonlit landscape and concentrated on keeping awake. Everything conspired to make him sleep. The hasty metal gallop of the wheels, the hypnotic swoop of the silver telegraph wires, the occasional melancholy, reassuring moan of the steam whistle clearing their way, the drowsy, metallic clatter of the couplings at each end of the corridor, the lullaby creak of the woodwork in the little room, even the deep, violent glimmer of the night light above the door seemed to say, I will watch for you. Nothing can happen while I am burning. Close your eyes and sleep, sleep. The girl's head was warm and heavy on his lap. There was so obviously just room for him to slip under the single sheet and fit close up against her, the front of his thighs against the back of hers, his head in the spread curtain of her hair on the pillow. Bond screwed up his eyes and opened them again. He cautiously lifted his wrist. 4 o'clock. Only one more hour to the Turkish frontier. Perhaps he would be able to sleep during the day. He would give her the gun and wedge the doors again, and she could watch. He looked down at the beautiful sleeping profile. How how innocent she looked. This girl from the Russian Secret Service. The lashes fringing the soft swell of her cheek, the lips parted and unaware, the long strand of hair that had strayed untidily across her forehead, and that he wanted to brush back neatly to join the rest. The steady slow throb of the pulse in the offered neck. He felt a surge of tenderness, and the impulse to gather her up in his arms and strain her tight against him. He wanted her to wake from a dream perhaps, so that way he could kiss her and tell her that everything was all right, and see her settle happily back to sleep. The girl had insisted on sleeping like this. "I won't go to sleep unless you hold me," she had said. "I must know you're there all the time. It would be terrible to wake up and not be touching you. Please, James. James Dushka." Bond had taken off his coat and tie, and had arranged himself in the corner with his feet up on his suitcase, and the Beretta under the pillow within reach of his hand. She had made no comment about the gun. She had taken off all her clothes except the black ribbon around her throat, and had pretended not to be provocative as she scrambled impudently into bed and wriggled herself into a comfortable position. She had held up her arms to him. Bond had pulled her head back by her hair and had kissed her once, long and cruelly. Then he had told her to go to sleep, and had leant back and waited icily for his body to leave him alone. Grumbling sleepily, she had settled herself, with one arm flung across his thighs. At first she had held him tightly, but her arm had gradually relaxed, and then she was asleep. Briskly Bond closed his eyes to the thought of her and focused on the journey ahead. Soon they would be out of Turkey, but would Greece be any easier? No love lost between Greece and England. And Yugoslavia? Whose side was Tito on? Probably both. Whatever the orders of the three MGB men, either they already knew Bond and Tatiana were on the train, or they would soon find out. He and the girl couldn't sit for 4 days in this coupe with the blinds drawn. Their presence would be reported back to Istanbul, telephoned from some station, and by the morning the loss of the Spectre would have been discovered. Then what? A hasty démarche through the Russian embassy in Athens or Belgrade? Have the girl taken off the train as a thief? Or was that all too simple? And if it was more complicated, if all this was part of some mysterious plot, some torturous Russian conspiracy, should he dodge it? Should he and the girl leave the train at a wayside station on the wrong side of the track and hire a car and somehow get a plane to London? Oh man, Bond is thinking of everything. Outside, the luminous dawn had begun to edge the racing trees and rocks with blue. Bond looked at his watch. 5 o'clock. They would soon be at Uzun-Kopru. What was going on down the train behind him? What had Karim achieved? Bond sat back, relaxed. After all, there was a simple commence answer to his problem. Or, sorry, common sense answer. If between them they could quickly get rid of the three MGB agents, they would stick to the train and to their original plan. If not, Bond would get the girl and the machine off the train somewhere in Greece and take another route home. But if the odds improved, Bond was for going on. He and Karim were resourceful men. Karim had an agent in Belgrade who was going to meet the train. There was always the embassy. Bond's mind raced on, adding up the pros, dismissing the cons. Behind his reasoning, Bond calmly admitted to himself that he had an insane desire to play the game out and see what it was all about. He wanted to take these people on and solve the mystery, and, if it was some sort of a plot, defeat it. M had left him in charge. He had the girl and the machine under his hand. Why panic? What was there to panic about? It would be mad to run away and perhaps only escape one trap in order to fall into another one. The train gave a loud whistle and began to slacken speed. Now, for the first round. If Karim failed, if the three men stayed on the train. Some goods trucks, led by a straining engine, filed by. The silhouette of sheds showed briefly. With a jolt and a screech of couplings, the Orient Express took the points and swerved away from the through line. Four sets of rails with grass growing between them showed outside the window, and the empty length of the down platform. A cock crowed. The express slowed to walking speed and finally, with a sigh of hydraulic brakes and a noisy whoosh of let off steam, ground to a stop. The girl stirred in her sleep. Bond softly shifted her head onto the pillow and got up and slipped out of the door. It was a typical Balkan wayside station, a facade of door buildings in over-pointed stone, a dusty expanse of platform, not raised but level with the ground so that there was a long step down from the train. Some chickens pecking about and a few drab officials standing idly, unshaven, not even trying to look important. Up towards the cheap half of the train, a chattering horde of peasants with bundles and wicker baskets waited for the customs and passport control so that they could clamber aboard and join the swarm inside. Across the platform from Bond was a closed door with a sign over it which said "Police." Through the dirty window beside the door, Bond thought he caught a glimpse of the head and shoulders of Karim. "Pasaportes, doanas." A plainclothes man and two policemen in dark green uniform with pistol holsters at their black belts entered the corridor. The wagon-lit conductor preceded them, knocking on the doors. At the door of number 12 the conductor made an indignant speech in Turkish, holding out the stack of tickets and passports and fanning through them as if they were a pack of cards. When he had finished, the plainclothesman uh, beckoning forward the two policemen, knocked smartly on the door, and, when it was open, stepped inside. The two policemen stood guard behind him. Bond edged down the corridor. He could hear a jumble of bad German. One voice was cold, the other was frightened and hot. The passport and ticket of Herr Kurt Goldfarb were missing. Had Herr Goldfarb removed them from the conductor's cabin? Certainly not. Had Herr Goldberg in truth ever surrendered his passports, his papers, to the conductor? Naturally. Then the matter was unfortunate. An inquiry would have to be held. No doubt the German legation in Istanbul would put the matter right. Bond smiled at this suggestion. Meanwhile, it was regretted that Herr Goldfarb could not continue his journey. No doubt he would be able to proceed tomorrow. Herr Goldfarb would get dressed. His luggage would be transported to the waiting room. The MGB man who erupted into the corridor was the dark Caucasian type man, the junior of the quote, visitors. His sallow face was gray with fear. His hair was awry, and he was dressed only in the bottom half of his pajamas. But there was nothing comical about his desperate flurry down the corridor. He brushed past Bond. At the door of number 6 he paused and pulled himself together. He knocked with tense control. The door opened on the chain, and Bond glimpsed a thick nose and part of a mustache. The chain was slipped, and Goldfarb went in. There was silence, during which the plain-clothes man dealt with the papers of two elderly French women in numbers 9 and 10, and then with Bond's. The officer barely glanced at Bond's passport. He snapped it shut and handed it to the conductor. Ooh, this is a French accent. I'll do my best. You are traveling with Karim Bey? He asked in French. His eyes were remote. Yes. Merci, monsieur. Bon voyage. The man saluted. He turned and rapped sharply on the door of number 6. The door opened, and he went in. 5 minutes later, the door was flung back. The plainclothes man, now erect with authority, beckoned forward the policeman. He spoke to them harshly in Turkish. He turned back to the coupe. Let's see, who's talking here? So, this guy's speaking in some bad German. I can kind of try to do a German accent. Consider yourself under arrest, mein Herr. Attempted bribery of officials is a grave crime in Turkey. There was an angry clamor in Goldfarb's bad German. It was cut short by one hard sentence in Russian. A different Goldfarb, a Goldfarb with madman's eyes, emerged and walked blindly down the corridor and went into number 12. A policeman stood outside the door and waited. Let's see. I think this is still in Russian. And your papers, mein Herr? Please step forward. I must verify this photograph. The plainclothes man held the green-backed German passport up to the light. Forward, please. Reluctantly, his heavy face pale with anger, the MGB man, who called himself Benz, stepped out into the corridor in a brilliant blue silk dressing gown. The hard brown eyes looked straight into Bond's, ignoring him. The plain-clothes man slapped the passport shut and handed it to the conductor. Your papers are in order, mein Herr. And now, if you please, the baggage. He went in, followed by the second policeman. The MGB man turned his blue back on Bond and watched the search. Bond noticed the bulge under the left arm of the dressing gown and the ridge of a belt around the waist. He wondered if he should tip off the plainclothes man. He decided it would be better to keep quiet. He might be hauled in as a witness. The search was over. The plainclothes man saluted coldly and moved on down the corridor. The MGB man went back into number 6 and slammed the door behind him. Pity, thought Bond. One had got away. Bond turned back to the window. A bulky man, wearing a gray Homburg and with an angry boil on the back of his neck, was being escorted through the door marked Police. Down the corridor a door slammed. Goldfarb, escorted by the policeman, stepped down off the train. With bent head he walked across the dusty platform and disappeared through the same door. The engine whistled, a new kind of whistle, the brave, shrill blast of a Greek engine driver. The door of the wagon-lit carriage clanged shut. The plain-clothes man and the second policeman appeared walking over to the station. The guard at the back of the train looked at his watch and held out his flag. There was a jerk and a dismissing crescendo of explosive puffs from the engine, and the front section of the Orient Express began to move. The section that would be taking the northern route through the Iron Curtain, through Dragamon on the Bulgarian frontier, only 50 miles away, was left beside the dusty platform, waiting. Bond pulled down the window and took a last look back at the Turkish frontier, where two men would be sitting in a bare room under what amounted to sentence of death. Two birds down, he thought. 2 out of 3. The odds looked more respectable. He watched the dead, dusty platform, with its chickens and the small black figure of the guard, until the long train took the points and jerked harshly on to the single main line. He looked away across the ugly, parched countryside towards the golden Guinea sun climbing out of the Turkish plain. It was going to be a beautiful day. Bond drew his head in out of the cool, sweet morning air. He pulled up the window with a bang. He had made up his mind. He would stay on the train and see the thing through. Ooh, Bond is interested. Even he is curious as to what will be happening with this setup that's going on here. I hope everyone's enjoying the book so far. We're on the final stretch. Sort of. We're on chapter 23. We still got like 5 chapters, so I guess it's not the final stretch. Oh, and happy Father's Day to all the dads if you're in here. Happy Father's Day. I don't know if anyone is a dad here, but you know, you have a dad. So happy Father's Day. On to chapter 23. Out of Greece. Hot coffee from the meager little buffet on Pythian. There would be no restaurant car until midday. A painless visit from the Greek customs and passport control, and then the berths were folded away on the train hurried south towards the Gulf of Ennis at the head of the Aegean. Outside there was extra light and color. The air was drier. The men at the little stations and in the fields were handsome. Sunflowers, maize, vines, and racks of tobacco were ripening in the sun. It was, as Darko had said, another day. Bond washed and shaved under the amused eyes of Tatiana. She approved of the fact that he put no oil on his hair. "It is a dirty habit," she said. "I was told that many Europeans have it. We would not think of doing it in Russia. It dirties the pillows. But it is odd that you in the West do not use perfume. All our men do." "We wash," said Bond, dryly. In the heat of her protest, there came a knock on the door. It was Kareem. Bond let him in. Kareem bowed towards the girl. "What a charming domestic scene!" he commented cheerfully, lowering his bulk into the corner near the door. "I have rarely seen a handsomer pair of spies." Tatiana gloried at him. "I am not accustomed to Western jokes," she said coldly. Kareem's laugh was disarming. "Ha! You'll learn, my dear. In England they are great people for jokes. There it is. Consider it proper to make a joke of everything. I also have learned to make many jokes. They grease the wheels. I have been laughing a lot this morning. Those poor fellows at Uzunköprü. I wish I could be there when the police telephones the German consulate in Istanbul. That is the worst of forged passports. They are not difficult to make, but it is almost impossible to forge also their birth certificates. the files of the country which is supposed to have issued them. I fear the careers of your two comrades have come to a sad end, Mrs. Somerset. How how did you do it? Bond nodded his tie. Money and influence. $500 to the conductor. Some big talk to the police. It was lucky our friends tried to bribe. A pity that crafty band's next door. He gestured at the wall. Didn't get involved. I couldn't do the passport trick twice. We will have to get him some other way. The man with the boils was easy. He knew no German, and traveling without a ticket is a serious matter. Ah, well, the day has started favorably. We have won the first round, but our friend next door will now be very careful. He knows what he has to reckon with. Perhaps that is for the best. It would have been a nuisance having to give you both under cover all day. Now we can move about, even have lunch together, as long as you bring the family jewels with you. We must watch to see if he makes a telephone call at one of the stations. But I doubt if he could tackle the Greek telephone exchange. He will probably wait until we are in Yugoslavia. But there I have my machine. We can get reinforcements if we need them. It should be a most interesting journey. There is always excitement on the Orient Express. Karim got to his feet. He opened the door. And romance. He smiled across the compartment. I will call you for lunch. I will call for you at lunchtime. Greek food is the worst than Turkish, but even my stomach is in service of the Queen. Bond got up and locked the door. Tatiana snapped. Your friend is not a Coulterney. It is disloyal to refer to your queen in that manner. Bond sat down beside her. Tanya, he said patiently, that is a wonderful man. He is also a good friend. As far as I am concerned, he cannot say anything he likes. He is jealous of me. He would he would like to have a girl like you. So he teases you. It is a form of flirting. You should take it as a compliment. You think so? She turned her large blue eyes on him. But what he said about his stomach and the head of your state, that was being rude to your queen. It would be considered very bad manners to say such a thing in Russia. They were still arguing when the train ground to a halt in the sun-baked, fly-swarming station of Alexandropolis. Bond opened the door into the corridor, and the sun poured in across a pale mirrored sea that married, almost without horizon, into a sky the color of the Greek flag. They had lunch, with the heavy bag under the table between Bond's feet. Karim quickly made friends with the girl. The MGB man called Benz avoided the restaurant car. They saw him on the platform buying sandwiches and beer from a buffet on wheels. Karim suggested they ask him to make a four at a bridge. A four at a bridge? What does that mean? Bond suddenly felt very tired, and his tiredness made him feel that they were turning this dangerous journey into a picnic. Tatiana noticed his silence. She got up and said that she must rest. As they went out of the wagon restaurant, they heard Karim calling gaily for brandy and cigarettes. Back in the compartment, Tatiana said firmly, now it is you who will sleep. She drew down the blind and shut out the hard afternoon light and the endless baked fields of maize and tobacco and wilting sunflowers. The compartment became a dark green underground cavern. Bond wedged the doors and gave her his gun and stretched out with his head in her lap and was immediately asleep. The long train snaked along the north of Greece below the foothills of the Rhodope Mountains. Xanthi came, Androma, and Thraea, and then they were in the Macedonian highlands, and the line swerved due south towards Salonika. It was dusk when Bond awoke in the soft cradle of her lap. At once, as if she had been waiting for the moment, Tatiana took his face between her hands and looked down into his eyes and said urgently, "Dushka, how long shall we have this for?" "For long." Bond's thoughts were still luxurious with sleep. "But for how long?" Bond gazed up into the beautiful, worried eyes. He cleared the sleep out of his mind. It was impossible to see beyond the next 3 days on the train, beyond their arrival in London. One had to face the fact that this girl was an enemy agent. His feelings would be of no interest to the interrogators from his service and from the ministries. Other intelligence services would also want to know what this girl had to tell them about the machine she worked with. Probably, at Dover, she would be taken away to the Cage, that well santried private house near Guildford, where she would be put into a comfortable but oh so well wired room, and the efficient men in plain clothes would come one by one and sit and talk with her, and the recorder would spin in the room below, and the records would be transcribed and sifted for their grains of new fact, and, of course, for the contradictions they would trap her into. Perhaps they would introduce a stool pigeon, a nice Russian girl who would commiserate with Tatiana over her treatment and suggest ways of escape, of turning double, of getting harmless information back to her parents. This might go on for weeks or months. Meanwhile, Bond would be tactfully kept away from her, unless the interrogators thought he could extract further secrets by using their feelings for each other. Then what? The changed name, the offer of a new life in Canada, the £1,000 a year she would be given from the secret funds. And where would he be when she came out of it all? Perhaps the other side of the world, or, if he was still in London, how much of her feeling for him would have survived the grinding of the interrogation machine? How much would she hate or despise the English after going through all of this? And, for the matter of that, how much would have survived of his own hot flame? "Dushka," repeated Tatiana impatiently. "How long?" "As long as possible. It will depend on us. Many people will interfere. We shall be separated. It will not always be like this in a little room. In a few days we shall have to step out into the world. It will not be easy. It will be foolish to tell you anything else." Tatiana's face cleared. "Hi, LLJ, what's up? What's up? How you doing tonight?" Tatiana's face cleared. She smiled down at him. "You are right. I will not ask any more foolish questions. But we must waste no time. No more of these days." She shifted his head and got up and lay down beside him. "Hey, I'm glad you're doing fine." "It's early for you." "Oh, it's early for you and it's late for me." "I'm glad you're doing well. Hopefully, you're having a good morning and you'll have a good day as the day continues. Which book am I reading? I am reading From Russia with Love, a James Bond story. I'm actually on the last couple of chapters of the book. We're on chapter, I think, 23. Yeah, it's 23. So right now, Bond is on a train with Tatiana, the Russian spy that you see next to me right here. This chick, he's with her, and she's acting as if she's in love with him, and they're both like playing the part of being in love with each other, so that way he can get information from her and she can get information from him. The writer is Ian Fleming. Ian Fleming. Oh, you know what? I just noticed this thing, the part. Where is it? Hold on, I have like my headset in the way. Let me fix. It's not that. Where is it? Why can't I click on that? Okay, got it. Let me scooch this a little bit. So it says Ian Fleming at the top. Right there. If you look at that heart, I'm trying to poke it. Let's see. Do you know My Sweet Orange Tree? My Sweet Orange Tree by Jose. I don't know what that is. No. Is this like a joke? You gonna say something inappropriate? Are you gonna try to make me say something inappropriate? Or is that a book? Let's see. Alright, well, so while you're typing, I will continue reading, okay? Lost my spot. Okay, here we go. A moment will me die. I'm not too sure what you mean. An hour later, when Bond was standing in the corridor, Darko Karim was suddenly beside him. He examined Bond's face. He said slyly, "You should not sleep so long. You have been missing the historic landscape of northern Greece, and it is time for the premiere service." Oh, it's a book. Okay, so the book is called My Sweet Orange Tree by Jose, and A Moment Will Me Die. Okay, I'll have to take a look at it. Let's see. "All you think about is food," said Bond. He gestured back with his head. "What about our friend?" Let's see. I'm reading an actual book. So I know like my model here, she has like this little book here, but I'm actually reading a physical book. And my physical book has this picture here of Tatiana. I don't do virtual books because it hurts my eyes. Even though that sounds silly because I stream. Let's see. "He has not stirred. The conductor has been watching for me. That man will end up the richest conductor in the wagon-lit company. $500 for Goldfarb's papers, and now $100 a day retainer until the end of the journey." Karim chuckled. "I have told him he may even get the medal for his services to Turkey. He believes we are after a smuggling gang. They're always using this train for running Turkish opium to Paris. He is not surprised, only pleased that he is being paid so well. And now, have you found out anything more from this Russian princess you have in there?" "I still feel quite disquiet. Everything is too peaceful. Those two men we left behind may have been quite innocently bound for Berlin, as the girl says. These bands may be keeping his room because he is frightened of us. All is going well with our journey. And yet, and yet, Karim shook his head. These Russians are great chess players. When they wish to execute a plot, they execute it brilliantly. The game is planned minutely. The gambits of the enemy are provided for. They are foreseen and countered. At the back of my mind, Karim's face in the window was gloomy. I have a feeling that you and I and this girl are pawns on a very big board, that we are being allowed our moves because they do not interfere with the Russian game. Let's see. LL said, I can recommend you an ad-free book site if you read virtual books. Oh yeah, I'd appreciate that. I'll check it out for sure. You can put actually I don't know if my chat takes links, but you can message me on Kick or get into my Discord. Let's see, this side of Bowie, maybe you search one day. Good stream. Bye. Oh, thank you all. Well, have a good night or a good day, I mean. Take it easy. Bye. Thanks for stopping by. All right, let's drink a little bit more. It's tea. It's nothing bad. Oh, let's see. Kind of lost my place. Okay, here we go. But what is the object of the plot? Bond looked out into the darkness. He spoke to his reflection in the window. What could they want to achieve? We always get back to that. Of course, we will have smelt a conspiracy of some sort, and the girl may not even know that she's involved in it. I know she's hiding something, but I think it's only some small secret she thinks is unimportant. She says she'll tell me everything when we get to London. Everything? What does she mean? She only says that I must have faith, that there is no danger. You must admit, Darko. Bond looked up for confirmation into the slow, crafty eyes. That she's lived up to her story. There was no enthusiasm in Karim's eyes. He said nothing. Bond shrugged. I admit I've fallen for her, but I'm not a fool, Darko. I've I've been watching for any clue, anything that would help. You know, one can tell a lot when certain barriers are down. Well, they are down, and I know she's telling the truth. At any rate, 90% of it. And I know she thinks the rest don't matter. If she's cheating, she's also being cheated herself. On your chess analogy, that is possible. But you still get back to the question of what it's all in aid of. Bond's voice hardened. And if you want to know, all I ask is to go on with the game until we find out. Karim smiled at the obstinate look on Bond's face. He laughed abruptly. If it was me, my friend, I would slip off the train at Salonika with the machine, and, if you like, with the girl also. Though it is not so important. I would take a hired car to Athens and get on the next plane for London. But I was not brought up to be a sport. Karim put irony into the words. This is not a game to me. It is business. Wait, is this Bond? Hold on. Uh, okay, yeah, no. This is. I think this is Kareem still. No, this is Bond. Sorry, I haven't. This is the first time I'm reading the book, and so I'm trying to figure out who's talking right now. Oh, thank you for the follow, LL. I hope you have a great day. I appreciate it. We got another mad man up in here. Save. Okay, yeah, this is Bond talking. All right. Okay. This is not a game to me. It is business. For you, it is different. You are a gambler. M also is a gambler. He obviously is, or he would not have given you a free hand. He also wants to know the answer to this riddle. So be it. But but I like to play safe, to make certain, to leave as little as possible to chance. You think the odds look right, that they are in your favor. Darko Karim turned and faced Bond. His voice became insistent. Listen, my friend. He put a huge hand on Bond's shoulder. This is a billiard table. An easy, flat, green billiard table. And you have hit your white ball and it is traveling easily and quietly towards the red. The pocket is alongside. Fatally, inevitably, you are going to hit the red, and the red is going into the pocket. It is the law of the billiard table and the law of the billiard room. But outside the orbit of these things, a jet pilot has fainted and his plane is diving straight at the billiard room, or a gas main is about to explode, or a lightning is about to strike, and the building collapses on top of you and on top of the billiard table. Then what has happened to that white ball that could not miss the red ball, and to the red ball that could not miss the pocket? The white ball could not miss, according to the laws of the billiard table. But the laws of the billiard table are not the only laws, and the laws governing the progress of this train and you to your destination are also not the only laws in this particular game. Karim paused. He dismissed his harangue, harangue with a shrug of the shoulders. You already know these things, my friend, he said apologetically, and I have made myself thirsty talking platitudes. Hurry the girl up. Yeah, hurry the girl up, and we will go and eat. But watch for surprises, I beg of you. He made a cross with his finger over the center of his coat. I did not cross my heart. That is being too serious. But I crossed my stomach, which is an important oath for me. There are surprises on the way for both of us. The gypsy said to watch out. Now I say the same. We can play the game on the billiard table, but we must both be on guard against the world outside the billiard room. My nose, he tapped it, tells me so. Kareem's stomach made an indignant noise, like a forgotten telephone receiver with an angry caller on the other end. There, he said solicitously. What did I say? We must go and eat. They finished their dinner as a train pulled into the hideous modern junction of Th- Thessaloniki. With Bond carrying the heavy little bag, they went back down the train and parted for the night. We shall soon be disturbed again, warned Kareem. There is the frontier at 1 o'clock. The Greeks will be no trouble, but those Yugoslavs like waking up anyone who is traveling soft. If they annoy you, send for me. Even in their country, there are some names I can't mention. I am in the second compartment in the next carriage. I have it to myself. Tomorrow I will move into our friend Goldfarb's bed in number 12. For the time being, the first class is an adequate stable. Bond dozed wakefully as the train labored up the moonlit valley of the Vardar towards the instep of Yugoslavia. Tatiana again slept with her head in his lap. He thought of what Darko had said. He wondered if he could not send the big man back to Istanbul when they had got safely through Belgrade. It was not too fair to drag him across Europe on an adventure that was outside his territory and with which he had little sympathy. Darko obviously suspected that Bond had become infatuated with the girl and wasn't seeing the operation straight anymore. Well, there was a grain of truth in that. It would certainly be safer to get off the train and make another route home. But Bond admitted to himself he couldn't bear the idea of running away from this plot. If it was a plot. If it wasn't, he equally couldn't bear the idea of sacrificing the 3 more days with Tatiana. And M had left the decision to him. As Darko had said, M also was curious to see the game through. Perversely, M too wanted to see what this whole rigmarole was about. Bond dismissed the problem. The journey was going well. Once again, why panic? "10 minutes after they arrived at the Greek frontier station of Idamoni, there was a hasty knocking on the door. It woke the girl. Bond slipped from under her head. He put his ear to the door. "Yes." "Le conducteur, monsieur. There has been an accident. Your friend Karim Bey." "Wait," said Bond fiercely. He fitted the Beretta into his holster and put on his coat. He tore open the door. "What is it?" The conductor's face was yellow under the corridor light. "Come!" He ran down the corridor towards the first class. Officials were clustered round the open door of the second compartment. They were standing, staring. The conductor made a path for Bond. Bond reached the door and looked in. The hair stirred softly on his head. Along the right-hand seat were 2 bodies. They were frozen in a ghastly death struggle that might have been posed for a film. Underneath was Karim, his knees up in a last effort to rise. The taped hilt of a dagger protruded from his neck near the jugular vein. His head was thrust back and the empty, bloodshot eyes stared up at the night. The mouth was contorted into a snarl. A thin trickle of blood ran down the chin. Half on top of him sprawled the heavy body of the MGB man called Benz, locked there by Karim's left arm round his neck. Bond could see a corner of the Stalin mustache and the side of a blackened face. Karim's right arm lay across the man's back almost casually. The hand ended in a closed fist and the knob of a knife hilt, and there was a wide stain on the coat under the hand. Bond listened to his imagination. It was like watching a film. The sleeping Darko. The man slipping quietly through the door. The 2 steps forward and the swift stroke at the jugular. Then the last violent spasm of the dying man, as he flung up an arm and clutched his murderer to him, and plunged the knife down towards the 5th rib. This wonderful man, who had carried the sun with him, now he was extinguished, totally dead. Bond turned brusquely and walked out of sight of the man who had died for him. He began carefully, non-committingly, to answer questions. "Oh no, Kareem died. Our boy was murdered. Who's gonna make jokes now? We're not gonna have anyone funny for the rest of the book." "No, Kareem." Moment of silence for my boy Kareem. Chapter 24. Out of Danger. The Orient Express steamed slowly into Belgrade at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, half an hour late. There would be an 8 hours delay while the other section of the train came in through the Iron Curtain from Bulgaria. Bond looked at the crowds and waited for the knock on the door that would be Kareem's man. Tatiana sat huddled in her sable coat beside the door, watching Bond, wondering if he would come back to her. She had seen it all from the window, the long wicker baskets being brought out to the train, the flash of the police photographer's bulbs, the gesticulating chef de train, chief de train, chef de train. I think it's supposed to be in French. Trying to hurry up the formalities, and the tall figure of James Bond, straight and hard and cold as a butcher's knife, coming and going. Bond had come back and had sat looking at her. He had asked sharp, brutal questions. She had fought desperately back, sticking coldly to her story, knowing that now, if she told him everything, told him, for instance, that Smersh was involved, she would certainly lose him forever. Now she sat and was afraid. Afraid of the web in which she was caught. Afraid of what might have been behind the lies she had been told in Moscow. Above all, afraid that she might lose this man who had suddenly become the light in her life. There was a knock on the door. Bond got up and opened it. A tough, cheerful, Indian rubbery man, with Kareem's blue eyes and a mop of tangled fair hair above a brown face, exploded into the compartment. I don't know how to do an Indian guy's voice, so I'm just gonna wing it. Stephen Tremble, at your service. The big smile embraced them both. They call me Tempo. Where is the chief? Chef. It's spelled Chef. Chef? Sit down. Sit down, said Bond. He thought to himself, I know it. This is another of Darko's sons. Okay, so it's just Darko's accent. Good. The man looked sharply at them both. He sat down carefully between them. His face was extinguished. Now the bright eyes stared at Bond with a terrible intensity in which there was fear and suspicion. His right hand slipped casually into the pocket of his coat. When Bond had finished, the man stood up. He didn't ask any questions. He said, Thank you, sir. Will you come, please? We will go to my apartment. There is much to be done. He walked into the corridor and stood with his back to them, looking out across the rails. When the girl came out, he walked down the corridor without looking back. Bond followed the girl, carrying the heavy bag and his little attaché case. They walked down the platform and into the station square. It had started to drizzle. The scene, with its sparkling of battered taxis and vistas of dull modern buildings, was depressing. The man opened the rear door of a shabby Morris Oxford saloon. He got in front and took the wheel. Oh, excuse me. They bumped their way over the cobbles and onto a slippery tarmac boulevard, and drove for a quarter of an hour through wide, empty streets. They saw few pedestrians and not more than a handful of other cars. They stopped halfway down a cobbled side street. Tempo led them through a wide apartment house door and up 2 flights of stairs that had the smell of the Balkans, the smell of very old sweat and cigarette smoke and cabbage. He unlocked the door and showed them into a two-roomed flat with nondescript furniture and heavy red plush curtains drawn back to show the blank windows on the other side of the street. On a sideboard stood a tray with several unopened bottles, glasses, and plates of fruit and biscuits. The welcome to Darko and to Darko's friends. Tempo waved vaguely towards the drinks. "Please, sir, make yourself and Madam at home. There is a bathroom. No doubt you would both like to have a bath. If you will excuse me, I must telephone." The hard facade of the face was about to crumble. The man went quickly into the bedroom and shut the door behind him. There followed 2 empty hours during which Bond sat and looked out the window at the wall opposite. From time to time he got up and paced to and fro, and then sat down again. For the first hour Tatiana sat and pretended to look through a pile of magazines. Then she abruptly went into the bathroom, and Bond vaguely heard water gushing into the bath. At about 6 o'clock Tempo came out of the bedroom. He told Bond that he was going out. "There is food in the kitchen. I will return at 9 and take you to the train. Please treat my flat as your own." Without waiting for Bond's reply, he walked out and softly shut the door. Bond heard his foot on the stairs and the click of the front door and the self-starter of the Morris. Bond went into the bedroom and sat on the bed and picked up the telephone and talked in German to the long-distance exchange. Half an hour later, there was the quiet voice of M. Bond spoke as a traveling salesman would speak to a managing director of Universal Export. He said that his partner had gone very sick. Were there any fresh instructions? "Very sick?" "Yes, sir, very." "How about the other firm?" "There were 3 of us, sir. One of them caught the same thing. The other 2 didn't feel well on the way out of Turkey. They left us at Uzenkopur. That's the frontier." "So the other firms packed up?" Bond could see M's face as he sifted the information. He wondered if the fan was slowly revolving in the ceiling, if M had a pipe in his hand, if the Chief of Staff was listening on the other wire. "What are your ideas? Would you and your wife like to take another way home?" "I'd rather you decided, sir. My wife's all right. The sample's in good condition. I don't see why it should deteriorate. I'm still keen to finish the trip. Otherwise, it'll remain virgin territory. We shan't know what the possibilities are." "Would you like one of our other salesmen to give you a hand?" "It shouldn't be necessary, sir. Just as you feel." "I'll think about it. So you really want to see this sales campaign through?" Bond could see M's eyes glittering with the same perverse curiosity, the same urge, the same rage to know, as he himself felt. "Yes, sir. Now that I'm halfway, it seems a pity not to cover the whole route." "All right, then. I'll think about giving you another salesman to lend a hand." There was a pause on the end of the line. "Nothing else on your mind?" "No, sir." "Good-bye, then." "Good-bye, sir." Bond put down the receiver. He sat and looked at it. He suddenly wished he had agreed with M's suggestion to give him reinforcements, just in case. He got up from the bed. At least they would soon be out of these damn Balkans and down into Italy. Then Switzerland, France, among some friendly people, away from the furtive lands. And the girl. What about her? Could he blame her for the death of Karim? Bond went into the next room and stood again by the window, looking out, wondering, going back over everything, every expression and every gesture she had made since he had first heard her voice on that night in the Crystal Palace. No, he knew he couldn't put the blame on her. If she was an agent, she was an unconscious agent. There wasn't a girl of her age in the world who could have played this role, if it was a role she was playing, without betraying herself. And he liked her, and he had faith in his instincts. Besides, with the death of Karim, had not the plot, whatever it was, played itself out? One day he would find out what the plot had been. For the moment, he was certain Tatiana was not a conscious part of it. Oh man, he caught the feels for Tatiana. Well, maybe she's half conscious of what's happening here. Maybe we'll find out. His mind made up, Bond walked over to the bathroom door and knocked. She came out and he took her in his arms and held her to him and kissed her. She clung to him. They stood and felt the animal warmth come back between them, feeling it push back the cold memory of Karim's death. Tatiana broke away. She looked up at Bond's face. She reached up and brushed the black comma of hair away from his forehead. His face was alive. "I am glad you have come back, James," she said. And then, matter-of-factly, "and now we must eat and drink and start our lives again." Later, after Slavovic and smoked ham and peaches, Tempo came and took them to the station and to the waiting express under the hard lights of the arcs. He said goodbye quickly and coldly and vanished down the platform and back into his dark existence. Punctually at 9 the new engine gave its new kind of noise and took the long train out on its all-night run down the valley of Sava. Bond went along to the conductor's cabin to give him money and look through the passports of the new passengers. Bond knew most of the signs to look for in forged passports: the blurred writing, the too exact imprint of the rubber stamps, the trace of old gum round the edges of the photograph, the slight transparencies on the pages where the fibers of the paper had been tampered with to alter a letter or a number. But the 5 new passports, 3 American and 2 Swiss, seemed innocent. The Swiss papers, favorites with the Russian forgers, belonged to a husband and wife, both over 70, and Bond finally passed them and went back to the compartment and prepared for another night with Tatiana's head on his lap. Vinkovci came and Brode, and then again a flaming dawn, the ugly sprawl of Zagreb. I don't know what that is. Is that like a place? The train came to a stop between lines of rusting locomotives captured from the Germans, and still standing forlornly amongst the grass and weeds on the sidings. Bond read the plate on one of them: Berliner Maschinenbau. Something like that. It's in a different language. Can't read it. As they slid out through the iron cemetery, its long black barrel had been raked with machine gun bullets. Okay, yeah. Sorry, I thought I skipped a line. Bond heard the scream of the dive bomber and saw the upflung arms of the driver. For a moment. Wait, did I skip? I did. Wait, did I skip a line? I skipped like half a freaking paragraph just now. Oh my god. Hold on. Let's start from the top. Vinkovci came and brood, and then against a flaming dawn the ugly sprawl of Zagreb. The train came to a stop between lines of rusting locomotives captured from the Germans and still standing forlornly amongst the grass and weeds on the sidings. Now, I guess my brain just turned off for a moment when I was reading this. Bond read the plate on one of them, Berliner Maschenbau, as they slid out through the iron cemetery. Its long black barrel had been raked with machine gun bullets. Bond heard the scream of the dive bomber and saw the upflung arms of the driver. For a moment he thought nostalgically and unreasonably of the excitement and turmoil of the hot war, compared with his own underground skirmishes since the war had turned cold. They hammered into the mountains of Slovenia, where the apple trees and the chalets were almost Austrian. The train labored its way through uh, Ljubljana. Ljubljana. The girl awoke. They had breakfast of fried eggs and hard brown bread, and coffee that was mostly chicory. The restaurant car was full of cheerful English and American tourists from the Adriatic coast, and Bond thought with a lift of the heart that by the afternoon they would be over the frontier into Western Europe, and that a third dangerous night was gone. He slept until Cesana. The hard-faced Yugoslav plainclothes men came on board. Then Yugoslavia was gone, and Pogariel came, and the first smell of the soft life with the happy jabbering Italian officials and the carefree upturned faces of the station crowd. The new diesel electric engine gave a slap happy whistle, the meadow of brown hands fluttered, and they were loping easily down into Venezia, toward the distant sparkle of Trieste and the gay blue of the Adriatic. "We've made it," thought Bond. "I really think we've made it." He thrust the memory of the last 3 days away from him. Tatiana saw the tense lines in his face relax. She reached over and took his hand. He moved and sat close beside her. They looked out at the gay villas on the Corniche and at the sailing boats and the people water skiing. The train clanged across some points and slid quietly into the gleaming station of Trieste. Bond got up and pulled down the window, and they stood side by side, looking out. Suddenly Bond felt happy. He put an arm around the girl's waist, and he held her hard against him. They gazed down at the holiday crowd. The sun shone through the tall, clean windows of the station in golden shafts. The sparkling scene emphasized the dark and dirt of the countries the train had come from, and Bond watched with an almost sensuous pleasure the gaily dressed people pass through the patches of sunshine toward the entrance, and the sunburned people, the ones who had had their holidays, hasten up the platform to get their seats on the train. A shaft of sun lit up the head of one man who seemed typical of his happy playtime world. The light flashed briefly on golden hair under a cap, and on a young golden mustache. There was plenty of time to catch the train. The man walked unhurriedly. It crossed Bond's mind that he was an Englishman. Perhaps it was the familiar shape of the dark green Kangol cap, or the beige, rather well used mackintosh, that badge of the English tourist, or it may have been the gray flannelled legs, or the scuffed brown shoes. But Bond's eyes were drawn to him, as if it was someone he knew, as the man approached up the platform. The man was carrying a battered Revelation suitcase, and under the other arm a thick book and some newspapers. He looked like an athlete, thought Bond. He was he has the wide shoulders and the healthy, good-looking, bronzed face of a professional tennis player going home after a round of foreign tournaments. Oh man, is this that assassin guy from the very beginning of the story? Oh. The man came nearer. Now he was looking straight at Bond with recognition. Bond searched his mind. Did he know this man? No. He could have remembered those eyes that stared out so coldly under the pale lashes. They were opaque, almost dead, the eyes of a drowned man. But they had some message for him. What was it? Recognition? Warning? Or just the defensive reaction to Bond's own stare? The man came up with the wagon lit. His eyes were now gazing levelly up the train. He walked past. He walked past the crepe soled shoes. What? He walked past the crepe soled shoes making no sound. Bond watched him reach for the rail and swing himself easily up the steps into the first-class carriage. Suddenly, Bond knew what the glance had meant, who the man was. Of course, this man was from the service. After all, M had decided to send along an extra hand. That was the message of those queer eyes. Bond would bet anything that the man would soon be along to make contact. How like M to make absolutely sure. Oh no. Oh no. Bond is getting confused. Oh. Oh no, he's gonna go talk to this guy and this guy's gonna feel like, what the heck, Bond's actually talking to me? Better kill him now. At least that's what I think. That's my theory, that this is, what's that guy in the very beginning? What was his name? He's that English guy who he betrayed the English to join the Russians. What was his name? Where is it? Is this it? No, that's not it. I'm trying to find this dude's name. It's like Grant or something? Do any of you remember? Oh yeah, his real name was Donovan Grant. Red Grant. I think that's who just went on the train. Let's see, his Russian name is Krasnogranitsky. Weird. Okay, now we're on chapter 25. A tie with a Windsor knot. To make the contact easy, Bond went out and stood in the corridor. He ran over the details of the code of the day, the few harmless phrases changed on the first of each month that served as a simple recognition signal between English agents. The train gave a jerk and moved slowly out into the sunshine. At the end of the corridor, the communicating door slammed. There was no sound of steps, but suddenly the red and gold face was mirrored in the window. Oh man. Excuse me, could I borrow a match? I use a lighter. Bond produced his battered Ronson and handed it over. Better still, until they go wrong. Bond looked up into the man's face, expecting a smile at the completion of the childish "Who goes there, pass friend" ritual. The thick lips withered briefly. There was no light in the very pale blue eyes. The man had taken off his mackintosh. He was wearing an old reddish-brown tweed coat with his flannel trousers, a pale yellow Viel summer shirt, and the dark blue and red zigzagged tie of the Royal Engineers. It was tied with a Windsor knot. Bond mistrusted anyone who tied his tie with a Windsor knot. It showed too much vanity. It was often the mark of a cad. Cad, jeez. Bond decided to forget his prejudice. A gold signet ring with an indecipherable crest glinted on the little finger of the right hand that gripped the guardrail. The corner of a red bandana handkerchief flopped out of the breast pocket of the man's coat. On his left wrist there was a battered silver wristwatch with an old leather strap. Bond knew the type. A minor public school, and then caught up by the war. Field security, perhaps. No idea what to do afterwards, so he stayed with the occupation troops. At first he would have been with the military police. Then, as the senior men drifted home, there came promotion into one of the security services. Moved to Trieste, where he did well enough. Wanted to stay on and avoid the rigors of England. Probably had a girlfriend, or had married an Italian. The Secret Service had needed a man for the small post that Trieste had become after the withdrawal. This man was valuable. They took him on. He would be doing routine jobs, have some low-grade sources in the Italian Yugoslav police and their intelligence networks. 1,000 a year. A good life, without much being expected from him. Then, out of the blue, this had come along. Must have been a shock getting one of those most immediate signals. He'd probably be a bit shy of Bond. Odd face. The eyes looked rather mad. But so they did in most of these men doing secret work abroad. One had to be a bit mad to take it on. Powerful chap, probably on the stupid side, but useful for this kind of guard work. M had just taken the nearest man and told him to join the train. All this went through Bond's mind as he photographed an impression of the man's clothes and general appearance. Now he said, "Glad to see you. How did it happen?" Wait. Oh, no, no. Okay, this is Bond talking. My bad. "Glad to see you. How did it happen?" "Got a signal late last night. Personal from M. Shook me, I can tell you that, old man." Curious accent. What was it? A hint of broke? Cheap broke? And something else Bond couldn't define. Probably came from living too long abroad and talking foreign languages all the time. And that dreadful old man at the end. Shyness. "Must have," said Bond sympathetically. "What did it say?" "Just told me to get on the Orient this morning and contact a man and a girl in the through carriage. More or less describe what you look like. Then I was to stick by you and see you both through the gay Paris. That's all, old man." Was there defensiveness in that voice? Bond glanced sideways. The pale eyes swiveled to meet his. There was a quick red glare in them. It was as if the safety door of a furnace had swung open. The blaze died. The door to the inside of the man was banged shut. Now the eyes were opaque again. The eyes of an introvert, of a man who rarely looks out into the world but is forever surveying the scene inside him. There's madness there, all right, thought Bond, startled by the sight of it. Shell shock, perhaps, or schizophrenia. Poor chap with that magnificent body. One day he would certainly crack. The madness would take control. Bond had better have a word to personnel. Check up on his medical. By the way, what was his name again? Let's see. Who's talking now? Okay. Well, I'm very glad to have you along. Probably not much for you to do. We started off with 3 Redland men on our tail. They've been got rid of, but there may be others on the train, or some more may get on, and I've got this girl to London without trouble, if you'd just hang about. Tonight, we'd better stay together and share watches. It's the last night, and I don't want to take any chances. By the way, my name's James Bond, traveling as David Somerset, and that's Caroline Somerset in there. The man fished in his inside pocket and produced a battered note case, which seemed to contain plenty of money. He extracted a visiting card and handed it to Bond. It said Captain Norman Nash, and in the left-hand bottom corner, Royal Automobile Club. As Bond put the card in his pocket, he slipped his finger across it. It was engraved. "Thanks," he said. "Well, Nash, come and meet Mrs. Somerset. No reason why we shouldn't travel more or less together." He smiled encouragingly. Again the red glare quickly extinguished. The lips writhed under the young golden mustache. Excuse me. "Delighted, old man." Bond turned to the door and knocked softly and spoke his name. Jeez, he calls him old man. That has to kind of bother him. That'd bother me for sure. At least say like old bean or something, not old man. Like that. Bond turned to the door and knocked softly and spoke his name. The door opened. Bond beckoned Nash in and shut the door behind him. The girl looked surprised. Excuse me. "This is Captain Nash, Norman Nash. He's been told to keep an eye on us." "How do you do?" The hand came out hesitantly. The man touched it briefly. His stare was fixed. He said nothing. The girl gave an embarrassed little laugh. "Won't you sit down?" Thank you." Nash sat stiffly on the edge of the banquette. He seemed to remember something one did when one had nothing to say. He groped in the side pocket of his coat and produced a packet of Players. "Will you have a cigarette?" He prized open the top with a fairly clean thumbnail, stripped down the silver paper, and pushed out the cigarettes. The girl took one. Nash's other hand flashed forward a lighter with the obsequious speed of a motor salesman. Nash looked up. Bond was standing, leaning against the door, and wondered how to help this clumsy, embarrassed man. Nash held out the cigarettes and the lighter as if he was offering glass beads to a native chief. What about you, old man?" "Thanks," said Bond. He hated Virginia tobacco, but he was prepared to do anything to help put the man at ease. He took a cigarette and lit it. They certainly had to make do with some queer fish in the service nowadays. How the devil did this man manage to get along in this semi-diplomatic society he would have to frequent in Trieste? Bond said lamely, "You look very fit, Nash. Tennis? Swimming? Been long in Trieste?" There came the brief red glare. "About 3 years." "Interesting work?" "Sometimes. You know how it is, old mon." Bond wondered how he could stop Nash calling him old man. He couldn't think of a way. Silence fell. Nash obviously felt it was his turn again. He fished in his pocket and produced a newspaper cutting. It was the front page of the Corriere della Sera. He handed it to Bond. "Seen this, old man?" The eyes blazed and died. It was the front page lead. The thick black lettering on the cheap newsprint was still wet. The headline said, "Terrible Terrible explosion in Istanbul. Ufficio Sovietico distrutto. Tutti I presenti uccisi." Sorry, it's in a different language. Bond couldn't understand the rest. He folded the cutting and handed it back. How much did this man know? Better treat him as a strong man arm and nothing else. "Bad show," he said. "Gas main, I suppose." Bond saw again the obscene belly of the bomb hanging down from the roof of the alcove in the tunnel. The wires that started off down the damp wall on their way back to the plunger in the drawer of Karim's desk. Who had pressed the plunger yesterday afternoon when Tempo had got through? The head clerk? Or had they drawn lots and then stood round and watched as the hand went down and the deep roar had gone up in the streets of books on the hills above? They would all have been there, in the cool room, with eyes that glittered with hate. The tears would be reserved for the night. Revenge would have come first. And the rats? How many thousand had been blasted down the tunnel? What time would it have been? About 4 o'clock. Had the daily meeting been on? 3 dead in the room. How many more in the rest of the building? Friends of Tatiana, perhaps. He would have had to keep the story from her. Had Darko been watching? From a window in Valhalla? Bond could hear the great laugh of triumph echoing round its walls. At any rate, Karim had taken plenty with him. Nash was looking at him. "Yes, I dare say it was a gas main," he said without interest. A handbell tinkled down the corridor, coming near. "Deuxième service, deuxième service. Prenez vos places, s'il vous plaît." Bond looked across at Tatiana. Her face was pale. In her eyes there was an appeal to be saved from any more of this clumsy, non-Coulterny man. Bond said, "What about lunch?" She got up at once. "What about you, Nash?" Captain Nash was already on his feet. "Had it, thanks, old man. And I'd like to have a look up and down the train. As the conductor, you know." He made a gesture of fingering money. "Ah, yes, he'll cooperate, all right," said Bond. He reached up and pulled down the heavy little bag. He opened the door for Nash. "See you later." Captain Nash stepped into the corridor. He said, "Yes, I expect so, old man." He turned left and strode off down the corridor, moving easily with the swaying of the train, his hands in his trouser pockets and the light blazing on the tight golden curls at the back of his head. I'm telling you, it's Grant. It's Grant from the very beginning, that assassin guy. It has to be. He's posing as an agent with Bond. And by the way, again, this is the first time I'm reading the book. I don't know if it is him. Then that's just what it is. And if it's not, then I didn't know. Bond followed Tatiana up the train. The carriages were crowded with holiday makers going home. In the third class corridors, people sat on their bags, chattering and munching at oranges and at hard looking rolls with bits of salami sticking out of them. The men carefully examined Tatiana as she squeezed by. The women looked appraisingly at Bond, wondering whether he made love to her well. In the restaurant car, Bond ordered Americanos and a bottle of Chianti Brigoli. The wonderful European hors d'oeuvres came. Tatiana began to look more cheerful. A funny sort of man. Bond watched her pick about among the little dishes. But I'm glad he's come along. I'll have a chance to get some sleep. I'm going I'm going to sleep for a week when we get home. I do not like him, the girl said indifferently. He is not Coulterny. I do not trust his eyes. Bond laughed. Nobody's Coulterny enough for you. Did you know him before? No, but he belongs to my firm. What did you say his name was? Nash. Norman Nash. She spelled it out. Nash. Like that? Yes. The girl's eyes were puzzled. I suppose you know what that means in Russian. Nash means ours. In our services, a man is Nash when he is one of our men. He is Svoi when he is one of theirs, when he belongs to the enemy. And this man calls himself Nash. That is not pleasant. Why is my face stuck? There we go. Bond laughed. Really, Tanya, you do think of extraordinary reasons for not liking people. Nash is quite a common English name. He's perfectly harmless. At any rate, he's tough enough for what we want him for. Tatiana made a face. She went on with her lunch. Some tagliatelle verdi came, and the wine, and then a delicious escalope. Oh, it is so good, she said. Since I came out of Russia, I am all stomach. Her eyes widened. You won't let me go. You won't let me get too fat, James. You won't let me get so fat that I am no use for making love. You will have to be careful, or I shall just eat all day long and sleep. You will beat me if I eat too much. Certainly I will beat you. Tatiana wrinkled her nose. He felt the soft caress of her ankles. The wide eyes looked at him hard. The lashes came down demurely. Please pay, she said. I feel sleepy. The train was pulling into Maestre. There was the beginning of the canals. A cargo gondola full of vegetables was moving slowly along a straight sheet of water into the town. But we shall be coming into Venice in a moment, protested Bond. Don't you want to see it? It will be just another station, and I can see Venice another day. Now I want you to love me. Please, James. Tatiana leaned forward. She put a hand over his. Give me what I want. There is so little time. Then it was the little room again, and the smell of the sea came through the half-open window, and the drawn blind fluttering with the wind of the train. Again, there were the two piles of clothes on the floor, and the two whispering bodies on the banquette, and the slow searching hands, and the love knot formed, and, as the train jolted over the points into the echoing station of Venice, there came the final lost despairing cry. Outside the vacuum of the tiny room, there sounded a confusion of echoing calls and metallic clanging and shuffling footsteps that slowly faded into sleep. Padao came, and Vicenza, and a fabulous sunset over Verona flickered gold and red through the cracks of the blind. Again the little bell came tinkling down the corridor. They woke. Bond dressed and went into the corridor and leant against the guard rail. He looked out at the fading pink light over the Lombardy plain and thought of Tatiana and of the future. Nash's face slid up alongside his in the dark glass. Nash came very close, so that his elbow touched Bond's. "I think I've spotted one of the Opa, the old man," he said softly. Bond was not surprised. He had assumed that, if it came, it would come tonight. Almost indifferently, he said, "Who is he?" "Don't know what his real name is, but he's been through Trieste once or twice. Something to do with Albania. It may be the resident director there. Now he's on an American passport. Wilbur Frank. Calls himself a banker in number 9, right next to you. I don't think he could be wrong about him, old man." Bond glanced at the eyes in the big brown face. Again the furnace door was ajar. The red glare shone out and was extinguished. "Good thing you spotted him. This may be a tough night. You'd better stick by us from now on. We mustn't leave the gal alone." "Oh man, it's getting crazy." "That's what I thought, old man." They had dinner. It was a silent meal. Nash sat beside the girl and kept his eyes on his plate. He held his knife like a fountain pen and frequently wiped it on his fork. He was clumsy in his movements. Halfway through the meal he reached for the salt and knocked over Tatiana's glass of Shanté. He apologized profusely. He made a great show of calling for another glass and filling it. Coffee came. Now it was Tatiana who was clumsy. She knocked over her cup. She had gone very pale, and her breath was coming quickly. Let's see. Wait, what is this? Who's talking? Uh, I guess it was Bond who said this. So she had gone very pale, and her breath was coming quickly. "Tatiana!" Bond half rose to his feet, but it was Captain Nash who jumped up and took charge. "Lady's come over queer," he said shortly. "Allow me." He reached down and put an arm round the girl and lifted her to her feet. "I'll take her back to the compartment. You'd better look after the bag. And there's the bill. I can take care of her till you come. I don't know. I don't like the sound of that. Sounds like Nash is trying to pull a fast one." "It's all right," protested Tatiana, with the slack lips of deepening unconsciousness. "Don't don't worry, James. I lie down." Her head lolled against Nash's shoulder. Nash put one thick arm round her waist and maneuvered her quickly and efficiently down the crowded aisle and out of the restaurant car. Bond impatiently snapped his fingers for the waiter. Poor darling, she must be dead beat. Why hadn't he thought of the strain she was going through? He cursed himself for his selfishness. Thank heavens for Nash, efficient sort of chap, for all his uncouthness. Bond paid the bill. He took up the heavy little bag and walked as quickly as he could down the crowded train. He tapped softly on the door of number 7. Nash opened the door. He came out with his finger on his lips. He closed the door behind him. Through a bit of a faint, he said. She's all right now. The beds were made up. She's gone to sleep in the top one. Bit a bit much for the girl, I expect, old man. Bond nodded briefly. He went into the compartment. A hand hung palely down from under the sable coat. Bond stood at the bottom bunk and gently tucked the hand under the corner of the coat. The hand felt cold. The girl made no sound. Bond stepped softly down. Better let her sleep. He went into the corridor. Oh my gosh, if she's dead, oh man. I don't even know. Nash looked at him with empty eyes. Well, I suppose we'd better settle in for the night. I've got my book. He held it up. Uh, War and Peace. Been trying to plow through it for years. You take the first sleep, old man. You look pretty flaked out yourself. I'll wake you when I can't keep my eyes open any longer. He gestured with his head at the door of number 9. Hasn't showed up yet. Don't suppose he will if he's up to any monkey tricks. He paused. By the way, you got a gun, old man? Yes. Why, haven't you? Nash looked apologetic. Afraid not. Got a Luger at home, but it's too bulky for this sort of job. Oh well, said Bond reluctantly. You better take mine. Come on in. They went in, and Bond shut the door. He took out the Beretta and handed it over. 8 shots, he said softly. Semi-automatic. It's on safe. Nash took the gun and weighed it professionally in his hand. He clicked the safe on and off. Bond hated someone else touching his gun. He felt naked without it. He said gruffly, Bit on the light side, but it'll kill if you put the bullets in the right places. Nash nodded. He sat down near the window at the end of the bottom bunk. I'll take I'll take this end, he whispered. Good field of fire. He put his book down on his lap and settled himself. Bond took off his coat and tie and laid them on the bunk beside him. He leant back against the pillows and propped his feet on the bag with the spectre that stood on the floor beside his attaché case. He picked up his Ambler and found his place and tried to read. After a few pages, he found that his concentration was going. He was too tired. He laid the book down on his lap and closed his eyes. Could he afford to sleep? Was there any other precaution they could take? The wedges! Bond felt for them in the pocket of his coat. He slipped off the bunk and knelt and forced them hard under the 2 doors. Then he settled himself again and switched off the reading light beside his head. The violet eye of the night light shone softly down. Thanks, old man, said Captain Nash softly. The train gave a moan and crashed into the tunnel. All right. I wonder what's gonna happen here. There's a lot of seems like Nash is Grant from earlier in the book. But that's just me. Let's keep going. Chapter 26. The killing bottle. The light nudge at his ankle woke Bond. He didn't move. His senses came to life like an animal's. Nothing had changed. There were the noises of the train, the soft iron stride, pounding out the kilometers, the quiet creak of the woodwork, a tinkle from the cupboard over the wash-bin where a toothless glass was loose in its holder. What had awoken him? The spectral eye of the nightlight cast its deep velvet sheen over the little room. No sound came from the upper bunk. By the window, Captain Nash sat in his place, his book open on his lap. A flicker of moonlight from the edge of the blind showing white on the double page. He was looking fixedly at Bond. Bond registered the intentness of the violent eyes. The black lips parted. There was a glint of teeth. "Sorry to disturb you, old man. I feel in the mood for a talk. What was there new in the... Oh, nope, that was the end of it, sorry. What was there new in the voice?" Bond put his feet softly down on the floor. He sat up straighter. Danger, like a third man, was standing in the room. "Fine," said Bond easily. What had there been in those few words that had set his spine tingling? What was it? The note of authority in Nash's voice? The idea came to Bond that Nash might have gone mad. Perhaps it was madness in the room, and not danger, that Bond could smell. His instincts about this man had been right. It would be a question of somehow getting rid of him at the next station. Where had they got to? When would the frontier come? Bond lifted his wrist to look at the time. The violet light defeated the phosphorus numerals. Bond tilted the face towards the strip of moonlight from the window. From the direction of Nash there came a sharp click. Bond felt a violent blow on his wrist. Splinters of glass hit him in the face. His arm was flung back against the door. He wondered if his wrist had been broken. He let his arm hang and flexed his fingers. They all moved. The book was still open on Nash's lap, but now a thin wisp of smoke was coming out of the hole at the top of its spine, and there was a faint smell of fireworks in the room. The saliva dried in Bond's mouth as if he had swallowed a loon. So there had been a trap all along, and the trap had closed. Captain Nash had been sent to him by Moscow, not by M. And the MGB agent in number 9, the man with an American passport, was a myth. And Bond had given Nash his gun. He had even put wedges under the doors so that Nash would feel more secure. Bond shivered, not with fear, with disgust. Nash spoke. His voice was no longer a whisper, no longer oily. It was loud and confident. "That will save us a great deal of argument, old man. Just a little demonstration. They think I'm pretty good with this little bag of tricks. There are 10 bullets in it, .25 dum-dum fired by an electric battery. You must admit, the Russians are wonderful chaps for dreaming these things up. Too bad that book of yours is only for reading, old man." "For God's sake, stop calling me old man." Oh, when there was so much to know, so much to think about, this was Bond's first reaction to utter catastrophe. It was the reaction of someone in a burning house who picks up the most trivial object to save from the flames. "Sorry, old man. It's got to be a habit. Part of trying to be a bloody gentleman. Like these clothes. All from the wardrobe department. They said I'd get by like this. And I did, didn't I, old man? But let's get down to business. I expect you'd like to know what this is all about. Be glad to tell you." We've got about half an hour before you're due to go. It'll give me an extra kick telling the famous Mr. Bond of the Secret Service was a bloody fool, he is. You see, old man, you're not so good as you think. You're just a stuffed dummy, and I've been given the job of letting the sawdust out of you. The voice was even and flat, the sentences trailing away on a dead note. It was as if Nash was bored by the act of speaking. "Yes," said Bond. "I'd like to know what it's all about. I can spare you half an hour." Desperately, he wondered, was there any way of putting this man off his stride, upsetting his balance? "Don't kid yourself, old man." The voice was uninterested in Bond, or in the threat of Bond. Bond didn't exist except as a target. "You're going to die in half an hour. No mistake about it. I've never made a mistake, or I wouldn't have my job." "What is your job?" "Chief Executioner of SMERSH." There was a hint of life in the voice, a hint of pride. The voice went flat again. "You know the name, I believe, old man." SMERSH. So that was the answer. The worst answer of all. And this was their chief killer. Bond remembered the red glare that flickered in the opaque eyes. A killer. A psychopath. A maniac. Depressive, probably. A man who really enjoyed it. What a useful man for Smersh to have found. Bond suddenly remembered that Favre had said he tried a long shot. "Does the moon have any effect on you, Nash?" The black lips writhed. "Clever, aren't you, Mr. Secret Service? Think I'm barmy? Don't worry. I wouldn't be where I am if I was barmy." The angry sneer in the man's voice told Bond that he had touched a nerve. But what could he achieve by getting the man out of control? Better humor him and gain some time. Perhaps Tatiana. Where does the girl come in to all of this? "Part of the bait." The voice was bored again. "Don't worry, she won't butt in on our talk. Fed her a pinch of chloral hydrate when I poured her that glass of wine. She'll be out for the night. And then, for every other night, she's to go with you." "Oh, really?" Bond slowly lifted his aching hand to his lap, flexing the fingers to get the blood moving. "Well, let's hear the story." "Careful, old man. No tricks. No bulldog drummled stuff'll get you out of this one. If I don't like even the smell of a move, it'll be just one bullet through the heart. Nothing more. That's what you'll be getting in the end. One through the center of your heart. If you move, it'll come a bit quicker. And don't forget who I am. Remember your wristwatch? I don't miss. Not ever." "Good show," said Bond carelessly. "But don't be frightened. You've got my gun, remember. Get on with your story." "All right, old man. Only don't scratch your ear while I'm talking, or I'll shoot it off. See? Well, Smersh decided to kill you. At least, I gather it was decided even higher up, right at the top. Seems they want to take one good hard poke at the Secret Service. Bring them down a peg or two. Follow me?" "Why choose me?" "Don't ask me, old man. But they say you've got quite a reputation in your outfit. The way you're going to be killed is going to bust up the whole show. It's been 3 months cooking, this plan, and it's a beaut. Got to be. Smarsh has made one or two mistakes lately. That Koklov business for one, remember the explosive cigarette case and all that? Gave the job to the wrong man. Should have given it to me. I wouldn't have gone over to the Yanks. However, to get back, you see, old man, we've got quite a plan on him, Smarsh. Man called Kronstein. Great chess player. He said vanity would get you, and greed, and a bit of craziness in the plot. He said you'd all fall for the craziness in London. And you did, didn't you, old man? Had they? Bond remembered just how much the eccentric angles of the story had aroused their curiosity. And vanity. Yes, he had to admit that the idea of this Russian girl being in love with him had helped. And there had been the specter. That had decided the whole thing. Plain greed for it. He said noncommittingly, "We were interested." Then came the operation. Our head of operations is quite a character. I'd say she's killed more people than anyone in the world, or arranged for them to be killed. Yes, it's a woman. Name of Klebb. Rosa Klebb. Real swine of a woman. But she certainly knows all the tricks. Rosa Klebb. So, at the top of Smirch, there was a woman. If he could somehow survive this and get after her. The fingers of Bond's right hand curled softly. The flat voice in the corner went on. Well, she found this Romanova girl, trained her for the job. By the way, how was she in bed? Pretty good? No. Bond didn't believe it. That first night must have been staged. But afterwards? No. Afterwards had been real. He took the opportunity to shrug his shoulders. It was an exaggerated shrug, to get the man accustomed to movement. Oh man. Bond is gonna have to pull a fast one on this guy. Oh well, not interested in that sort of thing myself, but they got some nice pictures of you two. Nash tapped his coat pocket. Whole reel of 16mm. That's going into her handbag. It'll look fine in the papers. Nash laughed. A harsh, metallic laugh. They'll have to cut some of the juiciest bits, of course. The change of rooms at the hotel, the honeymoon suite, the big mirror behind the bed. How well it all fitted. Bond felt his hands wet with perspiration. He wiped them down his trousers. Steady, old man. You nearly got it then. I told you not to move, remember? Bond put his hands back on the book in his lap. How much could he develop these small movements? How far could he go? Get on with the story, he said. Did the girl know these pictures were being taken? Did she know Smersh was involved in all of this? Nash snorted. Of course, she didn't know about the pictures. Rosa didn't trust her a yard. Too emotional. But I don't know much about that side. We all worked in compartments. I'd never seen her until today. I only know what I picked up. Yes, of course the girl knew she was working for Smersh. She was told she had to get to London and do a bit of spying there. The silly idiot, thought Bond. Why the hell hadn't she told him that Smersh was involved? She must have been frightened even to speak the name. Thought he would have her locked up or something. She had always said she would tell him everything when she got to England. That he must have faith and not be afraid. Faith! When she hadn't the foggiest idea herself what was going on. Oh well, poor child. She had been as fooled as he had been. But any hint would have been enough. Would have saved the life of Karim, for instance. And what about hers? and his own. Then this Turk of yours had to be got rid of. I'd rather that took a bit of doing. Tough nut. I suppose it was his gang that blew up the center in Istanbul, yesterday afternoon. That's going to create a bit of a panic. Too bad. Doesn't worry me, old man. My end of the job is going to be easy. Nash took a quick glance at his wristwatch. In about 20 minutes, we go into the Simplon tunnel. That's where they want it done. More drama for the papers. One bullet for you as we go into the tunnel, just one in the heart. The noise of the tunnel will keep in case you're a noisy dyer, rattle, and so forth. Then one in the back of the neck for her, with your gun, and out of the window she goes. Then one more for you with your gun, with your fingers wrapped round it, of course. Plenty of powder on your shirt. Suicide. That's what it'll look like at first, but there'll be two bullets in your heart. That'll come out later. More mystery. Search the Simplon again. Who was the man with the fair hair? They'll find the film in her bag, and in your pocket there'll be a long love letter from her to you. A bit threatening. It's a good one. Smersh wrote it. It says that she'll give the film to the newspapers unless you marry her. That you promised to marry her if she stole the spectre. Nash paused, and added in parentheses, as a matter of fact, old man, the spectre's booby-trapped. When your cipher experts thought fiddling with it, it's going to blow them all to glory. Not a bad dividend on the side. Nash chuckled dully. And then the letter says that all she's got to offer you is the machine and her body, and all about her body and what you did with it. Hot stuff, that part, right? Huh. So, what's the story in the papers? The left-wing ones that will be tipped off to meet the train? Old man, the story's got everything. Orient Express, beautiful Russian spy murdered in Simplon Tunnel, filthy pictures, secret cipher machine, handsome British spy with career ruined, murders her and commits suicide, sex, spies, luxury train, Mr. and Mrs. Somerset. Huh, old man, it'll run for months. Talk of the Clove case. This'll knock spots off it. And what a poke in the eye for the famous intelligence service. The best man, the famous James Bond. What a shambles. Then bang goes the cipher machine. What's your chiefs going to think of you? What's the public going to think? And the government? And the Americans? Ha ha ha! Talk about security. No more atom secrets from the Yanks. Nash paused and let it all sink in. With a touch of pride, he said, "Old man, this is going to be the story of the century." Yes, thought Bond. Yes, he was certainly right about that. The French papers would give it such a send-off there'd be no stopping it. They wouldn't mind how far they went with the pictures or anything else. There wasn't a press in the world that wouldn't pick it up. And the spectre? Would M's people or the Duxium have the sense to guess it was booby-trapped? How many of the best cryptographers in the West would go up with it? God, he must get out of this jam. But how? Oh man, things are getting crazy. Crazy. Alright, we're getting close to the end. Ah! We're getting close. I'm excited. The top of Nash's War and Peace yawned at him. Let's see. There would be the roar as the train went into the tunnel. Then, at once, the muffled click and the bullet. Bond's eyes stared into the violet gloom. Oh, excuse me. Measuring the depth of the shadow in his corner, under the roof of the top bunk. remembering exactly where his anti-shade case stood on the floor, guessing what Nash would do after he had fired. Bond said, "You took a bit of a gamble on my letting you team up with Trace. And how did you know the code of the month?" Nash said patiently, "You don't seem to get the picture, old man. Smersh is good. Really good. There's nothing better. We know your code of the month for every year. If anyone in your show noticed these things, noticed the pattern of them, like my show does, you'd realize that every January you lose one of your small chaps somewhere. Maybe Tokyo, maybe Timbuktu. Smersh just picks one and takes him. Then they screw the code for the year out of him. Anything else he knows, of course, but it's the code they're after. Then it's passed round the centers. Simple as falling off a log, old man." Bond dug his nails into the palms of his hands. "As for picking you up at Trace, old man, I didn't. Rode down with you in the front of the train, got out as we stopped, and walked back up the platform. You see, old man, we were waiting for you in Belgrade. Knew you'd call your chief, or the embassy or someone. Been listening in on that Yugoslav's telephone for weeks. Pity we didn't understand the code word he shot through the Istanbul. Might have stopped the firework display, or anyway saved our chops, but the main target was you, old man, and we certainly had you sewn up all right. You were in the killing bottle from the minute you got off the plane in Turkey. It was only a question of when to stuff the cork in." Nash took another quick glance at his watch. He looked up. His grinning teeth glistered violent. "Pretty soon, old man. It's just cork hour minus 15." Bond thought, "We knew Smersh was good, but we never knew they were as good as this." The knowledge was vital. Somehow he must get it back. He must. Bond's mind raced round the details of his pitiful, thin, pitiful, desperate plan. He said, he said, "Smersh seems to have thought things out pretty well. Must have taken a lot of trouble. There's only one thing." Bond let his voice hang in the air. "What's that, old man?" Nash, thinking of his report, was alert. The train began to slow down. Domodossola, the Italian frontier. What about customs? But Bond remembered there were no formalities for the through carriages until they got to France, to the frontier, Valerbis. Even then, not for the sleeping cars. These expresses cut straight across Switzerland. It was only people who got out at Brick or Lausanne who had to go through customs in the stations. "Well, come on, old man." Nash sounded hooked. "Not without a cigarette." "Okay, go ahead. But if there's a move I don't like, you'll be dead." Bond slipped his right hand into his hip pocket. He drew out his broad gunmetal cigarette case, opened it, took out a cigarette, took his lighter out of his trouser pocket, lit the cigarette and put the and put the lighter back. Yeah, he didn't put the cigarette back in his pocket. It was the lighter. He left the cigarette case on his lap beside the book. He put his left hand casually over the book and the cigarette case as if to prevent them slipping off his lap. He puffed away at his cigarette. If only it had been a trick one magnesium flare, or anything he could throw in the man's face. If only his service went in for those explosive toys. But at least he had achieved his operative and hadn't been shot in the process. That was a start. I said operative, it says objective. I don't know. I don't know, man. My brain slowly isn't working anymore. You see, Bond described an airy circle with his cigarette to distract Nash's attention. His left hand slipped the flat cigarette case between the pages of his book. You see, it looks all right. But what about you? What are you going to do after we come out of the Simplon? The conductor knows you're mixed up with us. They'll be after you in a flash. Oh, that. Nash's voice was bored again. You don't seem to have hoisted in that Russians think these things out. I get off at Dijon and take a car to Paris. I get lost there. A bit of third man stuff won't do the story any harm. Anyway, it'll come out later that when they dig the second bullet out of you and can't find the second gun, they won't catch up with me. Matter of fact, I've got a date at noontime tomorrow, room 204 at the Ritz Hotel, making my report to Rosa. She wants to get the kudos for this job. Then I turn into her chauffeur and we drive to Berlin. Come to think of it, old man. The flat voice showed emotion, became greedy. I think she may have the Order of Lenin for me in her bag. Lovely grub, as they say. The train began to move. Bond tensed. In a few minutes it would come. What a way to die, if he was going to die, through his own stupidity. Blind, lethal stupidity. And lethal for Tatiana. Christ. At any moment he could have done something to dodge this shambles. There had been no lack of opportunity, but conceit and curiosity and 4 days of love had sucked him along on the easy stream down which it had been planned that he should drift. That was the damnable part of the whole business. The triumph for Smersh, the one enemy he had always sworn to defeat wherever he met it. He will do this, and he will do that. Comrades, it is easy with a vain fool like Bond. Watch him take the bait. You will see. I tell you he's a fool. All Englishmen are fools. And Tatiana, the lure, the darling lure. Bond thought of their first night, the black stockings, the velvet ribbon, and all the time Smersh had been watching him go through his conceited paces, as it had been planned that he would, so that the smear could be built up, the smear on him, the smear on M who had sent him to Istanbul, the smear on the service that lived on the myth of its name. God, what a mess. If only his tiny grain of a plan might work. Ahead, the rumble of the train became a deep boom. The oval mouth between the white pages seemed to gape wider. In a second the dark tunnel would stitch out the moonlight on the pages, and the blue tongue would lick out for him. Sweet dreams, you English bastard. The rumble became a great, swift, clanging roar. The spine of the book bloomed flame. The bullet, homing on Bond's heart, flashed over its 2 quiet yards. Bond pitched forward onto the floor and lay sprawled under the funeral violet light. And now we are on, wait, chapter 27. Wait, are there only 27 chapters? I wrote 28. Oh, there's only 27 chapters. My bad. Wait, is there? Oh, no, no, no. Yeah, yeah. There's 28 chapters. They're just short chapters. All right, chapter 27. 10 pints of blood. Nice. It had all depended on the man's accuracy. Nash had said that Bond would get 1 bullet through the heart. Bond had taken the gamble that Nash's aim was as good as he had said, and it had been. Bond laid like a dead man lies. before the bullet, he had recalled the corpses he had seen, how their bodies had looked in death. Now he lay totally collapsed like a broken doll, his arms and legs carefully outflung. He explored his sensations. Where the bullet had crashed into the book, his ribs were on fire. The bullet must have gone through the cigarette case and then through the other half of the book. He could feel the hot lead over his heart. It felt as if it was burning inside his ribs. It was only a sharp pain in his head where it had hit the woodwork, and the violent sheen on the scuffed toe caps against his nose, that said he wasn't dead. Like an archaeologist, Bond explored the carefully planned ruins of his body. Excuse me. The position of the sprawled feet, the angle of the half-bent knee that would give purchase when it was needed, the right hand that seemed to be clawing at his pierced heart was within inches, when he could release the book of the little attaché case, within inches of the lateral stitching that held the flat-bladed throwing knives, two-edged and sharp as razors, that he had mocked when Q Branch had demonstrated the catch that held them, and his left hand, outflung in the surrender of death, rested on the floor and would provide upward leverage when the moment came. Above him there sounded a long, cavernous yawn. The brown toe caps shifted. Bond watched the shoe leather strain as Nash stood up. In a minute, with Bond's gun in his right hand, Nash would climb onto the bottom bunk and reach up and feel through the curtain of hair for the base of the girl's neck. Then the snout of the Beretta would nuzzle in after the probing fingers. Nash would press the trigger. The roar of the train would cover the muffled boom. It would be a near thing. Bond desperately tried to remember simple anatomy. Where were the mortal places in the lower body of a man? Where did the main artery run? The femoral, down the inside of the thigh, and the external iliac, or whatever it was called that became the femoral, across the center of the groin. If he missed both, it would be bad. Bond had no illusions about being able to beat this terrific man in unarmed combat. The first violent stab of his knife had to be decisive. The brown toe caps moved. They pointed toward the bunk. What was the man doing? There was no sound except the hollow iron clang as the great train tore through the Simplon, through the heart of the Weissenhorn and Mount Leon. The toothed glass tinkled, the woodwork creaking comfortably. For 100 yards on both sides of the little death cell rows of people were sleeping or lying awake, thinking of their lives and loves, making little plans, wondering who would meet them at the Gare de Lyon. And all the while, just along the corridor, Death was riding with them down the same dark hole, beside the same great diesel, on the same hot rails. One brown shoe left the floor. It would have stepped half across Bond. The vulnerable arch would be open above Bond's head. Bond's muscles coiled like a snake's. His right hand flickered a few centimeters to the hard stitching on the edge of the case, pressed sideways, felt the narrow shaft of the knife, drew it softly halfway out without moving his arm. The brown heel lifted off the ground. The toe bent and took the weight. Now the second foot had gone. Softly move the weight here. Take the purchase there. Grasp the knife hard so that it wouldn't turn on a bone. And then, in one violent corkscrew of motion, Bond's body twisted up from the floor. The knife flashed. The fist, with the long steel finger, and all Bond's arm and shoulder behind it, lunged upwards. Bond's knuckles felt flannel. He held the knife in, forcing it further. A ghastly, wailing cry came down to him. The Beretta clattered to the floor. Then the knife was wrenched from Bond's hand as the man gave a convulsive twist and crashed down. Bond had planned for the fall, but as he sidestepped towards the window, a flailing hand caught him and sent him thudding on to the lower bunk. Before he could recover himself, up from the floor rose a terrible face, its eyes shining violent, the violent teeth bared. Slowly, agonizingly, the two huge hands groped for him. Bond, half on his back, kicked out blindly. His shoe connected, but then his foot was held and twisted and he felt himself slipping downwards. Bond's fingers scrabbled for a hold in the stuff of the bunk. Now the other hand had him by the thigh. Nails dug into him. Bond's body was being twisted and pulled down. Soon the teeth would be at him. Bond hammered out his free leg. It made no difference. He was going. Suddenly, Bond's scrabbling fingers felt something hard. The book. How did one work the thing? Which way, which way up was it? Would it shoot him or Nash? Desperately, Bond held it out towards the great sweating face. He pressed at the back of the cloth spine. Click! Bond felt the recoil. Click, 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 click! Now Bond felt the heat under his fingers. The hands on his legs were going limp. The glistening face was drawing back. A noise came from the throat, a terrible, gurgling noise. Then, with a slither and a crack, the body fell forward onto the floor, and the head crashed back against the woodwork. Oof. Dang. Bond lay and panted through the clenched teeth. He stared up at the violet light above the door. Wait, have I been saying violent for the light? It's violet. Oh my god. He noticed that the loop of the filament waxed and waned. It crossed his mind that the dynamo under the carriage must be defective. He blinked his eyes to focus the light more closely. The sweat ran into them and stung. He lay still, doing nothing about it. The galloping boom of the train began to change. It sounded hollower. With a final echoing roar, the Orient Express sped out into the moonlight and slackened speed. Bond lazily reached up and pulled at the edge of the blind. He saw warehouses and sidings. Lights shone brightly, cleanly on the rails. Good, powerful lights. The lights of Switzerland. The train slid quietly to a stop. In the steady, singing silence, a small noise came from the floor. Bond cursed himself for not having made certain. He quickly bent down, listening. He held the book forward at the ready, just in case. No movement. Bond reached and felt for the jugular vein. No pulse. The man was quite dead. The corpse had been settling. Bond sat back and waited impatiently for the train to move again. There was a lot to be done. Even before he could see Tatiana, there would have to be the cleaning up. With a jerk, the long express started softly rolling. Soon, the train would be slalomly fast down through the foothills of the Alps into the Canton Valais. Valais? Yeah. Already, there was a new sound in the wheels, a hurrying lilt, as if they were glad the tunnel was past. Bond got to his feet and stepped over the sprawling legs of the dead man and turned on the top light. What a shambles! The place looked like a butcher's shop. How much blood did a body contain? He remembered. 10 pints. Well, it would soon all be there, as long as it didn't spread into the passage. Bond stripped the bedclothes off the bottom bunk and went to work. At last the job was done. The walls swabbed down around the covered bulk of the floor, the suitcases ready for the getaway to Dijon. Bond drank down a whole carafe of water. Then he stepped up and gently shook the shoulder of fur. There was no response. Had the man lied? Had he killed her with the poison? Bond thrust his hand in against her neck. It was warm. Bond felt for the lobe of an ear and pinched it hard. The girl stirred sluggishly and moaned. Again Bond pinched the ear, and again. At last a muffled voice said, "Don't." Bond smiled. He shook her. He went on shaking until Tatiana slowly turned over on her side. Two doped blue eyes gazed into his and closed again. "What is it?" The voice was sleepily angry. Bond talked to her, and bullied her and cursed her. He shook her more roughly. At last she sat up. She gazed vacantly at him. Bond pulled her legs out so that they hung down over the edge. Somehow he manhandled her down onto the bottom bunk. Tatiana looked terrible. The slack mouth, the upturned, sleep-drunk eyes, the tangle of damp hair. Bond got to work with a wet towel and her comb. Lassagne came, and, an hour later, the French frontier at Villerbos. Bond left Tatiana and went out and stood in the corridor, just in case. But the customs and passport men brushed past him to the conductor's cabin, and after 5 inscrutable minutes went on down the train. Bond stepped back into the compartment. Tatiana was asleep again. Bond looked at Nash's watch, which was now on his own wrist. 4:30. Another hour to Dijon. Bond set to work. At last Tatiana's eyes opened wide. Her pupils were more or less centered. She said, "Stop it now, James." She closed her eyes again. Bond wiped the sweat off his face. He took the bags, one by one, to the end of the corridor and piled them against the exit. Then he went along to the conductor and told him that Madame was not well and that they would be leaving the train at Dijon. Bond gave the conductor a final tip. "Do not derange yourself," he said. "I have taken the luggage out so as not to disturb Madame. My friend, the one with the fair hair, is a doctor. He has been sitting up with us all night. I have put him to sleep in my bunk. The man was exhausted. It would be kind not to awaken him until 10 minutes before Paris." "Certainement, monsieur." The conductor had not been showered with money like this since the good days of traveling millionaires. He handed over Bond's passport and tickets. The train began to slacken speed. "Voilà, Guénot et Sommes." I don't know. Said stuff in French. Bond went back to the compartment. Or, is that French? Yeah, it's French. He dragged Tatiana to her feet and out into the corridor and shut the door on the white pile of death beside the bunk. At last they were down the steps and onto the hard, wonderful, motionless platform. A blue smocked porter took their luggage. The sun was beginning to rise. At that hour of the morning there were very few passengers awake. Only a handful in the third class, who had ridden hard through the night, saw a young man help a young girl away from the dusty carriage with the romantic names on its side towards the drab door that said "Sorti." All right, we are on our final chapter. It's only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages long. So chapter 28, La Tricotieuse. La Tricotieuse? I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm sorry. The taxi drew up at the Rue Cambon entrance to the Ritz Hotel. Bond looked at Nash's watch. 11:45. He must be dead punctual. He knew that if a Russian spy was even a few minutes early or late for a rendezvous, the rendezvous was automatically cancelled. He paid off the taxi and went through the door on the left that leads into the Ritz bar. Bond ordered a double vodka martini. He drank it half down. He felt wonderful. Suddenly, suddenly, the last 4 days, and particularly last night, were washed off the calendar. Now he was on his own, having his private adventure. All his duties had been taken care of. The girl was sleeping in a bedroom at the embassy. The spectre, still pregnant with explosive, had been taken away by the bomb disposal squad of the Dixiom Bureau. And he had spoken to his old friend Rene Mathis, now head of the Dixiom, and the concierge at the Cambon entrance to the Ritz had been told to give him a pass key and to ask no questions. Rene had been delighted to find himself again involved with Bond in une affaire noire. Uh, have confidence, cher James, he had said. I will execute your mysteries. You can tell me the story afterwards. Two laundrymen with a large laundry basket will come to room 204 at 12:15. I shall accompany them dressed as a driver of their camion. We are to fill the laundry basket and take it to Orly and await an RAF Canberra, which will arrive at 2 o'clock. We hand over the basket. Some dirty washing things was in France. Will be in England. Yes. Head of Station F had spoken to M on the Scrambler. He had passed over a short written report from Bond. He had asked for the Canberra. No, he had no idea what it was for. Bond had only shown up to deliver the girl and the spectre. He had eaten a huge breakfast and had left the embassy saying he would be back after lunch. Bond looked again at the time. He finished his martini. He paid for it and walked out of the bar and up the steps to the concierge lodge. The concierge looked sharply at him and handed over a key. Bond walked over to the lift and got in and went up to the third floor. The lift door clanged behind him. Bond walked slowly down the corridor, looking at the numbers. 204. Bond put his right hand inside his coat and onto the taped butt of the Beretta. It was tucked into the waistband of his trousers. He could feel the metal of the silencer warm across his stomach. He knocked once with his left hand. Come in. Oh, sorry. Come in. It was a quavering voice, an old woman's voice. Bond tried the handle of the door. It was unlocked. He slipped the pass key into his coat pocket. He pushed the door open with one swift motion and stepped in and shut it behind him. It was a typical Ritz sitting room, extremely elegant, with good Empire furniture. The walls were white, and the curtains and chair covers were of a small patterned chintz of red roses on white. The carpet was wine red and close fitted. In a pool of sunshine, in a low armchair beside a directory, a writing desk, a little old woman sat knitting. The tinkling of the steel needles continued. The eyes behind light blue tinted bifocals examined Bond with polite curiosity. "Oui, monsieur." The voice. Oh, the voice was deep and hoarse. Okay, hold on, sorry. "Oui, monsieur." The thickly powdered, rather puffy face under the white hair showed nothing but well-bred interest. Bond's hand on the gun under his coat was taut as a steel spring. His half-closed eyes flickered round the room and back to the little old woman in the chair. Had he made a mistake? Was this the wrong room? Should he apologize and get out? Could this woman possibly belong to Smersh? He looked so exactly like the sort She looked so exactly like the sort of respectable rich widow one would expect to find sitting by herself in the Ritz, while the time away whiling the time away with her knitting. The sort of woman who would have her own table and her favorite waiter in a corner of the restaurant downstairs, not, of course, the grill room. The sort of woman who would doze after lunch and then be fetched by an elegant black limousine with white side walled tires and be driven to the tea room in the Rue de Berry to meet some other rich crone. The old fashioned black dress with the touch of lace at the throat and wrists, the thin gold chain that hung down over the shapeless bosom and ended in a folding lorgnette, the neat little feet in the sensible black buttoned boots that barely touched the floor. It couldn't be Cleb. Bond had got the number of the wrong room. He could feel the perspiration under his arms, but now he would have to play the scene through. My name is Bond. James Bond. And I'm. Oh, wait, sorry, I forgot her voice is deep and horse like. And I, monsieur, am the Comtesse Metterstein. What can I do for you? The French was rather thick. Can't do a French accent, sorry. She might be German Swiss. The needles tinkled busily. I am a friend. I am afraid Captain Nash has met with an accident. He won't be coming today, so I came instead. Did the eyes narrow a fraction behind the pale blue spectacles? I have not the pleasure of the captain's acquaintance, monsieur, nor of yours. Please sit and state your business. The woman inclined her head and inched towards the high-backed chair beside the writing desk. One couldn't fault her. The graciousness of it all was devastating. Bond walked across the room and sat down. Now he was about 6 feet away from her. The desk held nothing but a tall, old-fashioned telephone with a receiver on a hook, and within reach of her hand an ivory buttoned bell push. The black mouth of the telephone yawned at Bond politely. Bond stared rudely into the woman's face, examining it. It was an ugly face, toad-like. Under the powder and under the tight cottage loaf of white hair, the eyes were so light brown as to be almost yellow. The pale lips were wet and blubbery below the fringe of nicotine-stained mustache. Nicotine? Where were her cigarettes? There was no ashtray, no smell of smoke in the room. Bond's hand tightened again on his gun. He glanced down at the bag of knitting, at the shapeless length of small denier beige wool the woman was working on, the steel needles. What was there odd about them? The ends were discolored, as if they had been held in fire. Did knitting needles ever look like that? "En bien, monsieur." Was there an edge to the voice? Had she read something in his face? Bond smiled. His muscles were tense, waiting for any movement, any trick. "It's no use," he said cheerfully, gambling. "You are Rosa Klebb, and you are head of Otdial II of Smersh. You are a torturer and a murderer. You wanted to kill me and the Romanov girl. I am very glad to meet you at last." The eyes had not changed. The harsh voice was patient and polite. The woman reached out her left hand towards the bell push. "Monsieur, I am afraid you are deranged. I must ring for the valet de chambre and have you shown to the door." Bond never knew what saved his life. Perhaps it was the flash of realization that no wires led from the bell push to the wall or into the carpet. Perhaps it was the sudden memory of the English "come in" when the expected knock came on the door. But as her finger reached the ivory knob, he hurled himself sideways out of the chair. As Bond hit the ground, there was a sharp noise of tearing calico. Splinters from the back of his chair sprayed around him. The chair crashed to the floor. Bond twisted over, tugging at his gun. Out of the corner of his eye he noticed a curl of blue smoke coming from the mouth of the telephone. Then the woman was on him. The knitting needles glinted in her clenched fists. She stabbed downwards at his legs. Bond lashed out with his feet and hurled her sideways. She had aimed at his legs. As he got to one knee, Bond knew what the colored tips of the needles meant. It was poison. Probably one of those German nerve poisons. All she had to do was scratch him, even through his clothes. Bond was on his feet. She was coming at him again. He tugged furiously at his gun. The silencer had caught. There was a flash of light. Bond dodged. One of the needles rattled against the wall behind him, and the dreadful chunk of woman, the white bun of wig askew on her head, the slimy lips drawn back from her teeth, was on top of him. Bond, not daring to use his naked fists against the needles, vaulted sideways over the desk. Panting and talking to herself in Russian, Rosa Klebb scuttled round the desk and the remaining needle held forward like a rapier. Bond backed away, working at the stuck gun. The back of his legs. The back of his legs came against a small chair. He let go the gun and reached behind him and snatched it up, holding it by the back. With its legs pointing like horns, he went round the desk to meet her, but she was beside the bogus telephone. She swept it up and aimed it. Her hand went to the button. Bond leapt forward. He crashed the chair down. Bullets sprayed into the ceiling and plaster pattered down on his head. Bond lunged forward again. The legs of the chair clutched the woman round the waist and over her shoulders. God, she was strong. She gave way, but only to the wall. There she held her ground, spinning at Bond over the top of the chair, while the knitting needle quested towards him like a long scorpion's sting. Bond stood back a little, holding the chair at arm's length. He took aim and high kicked at the probing wrist. The needle sailed away into the room and pinged down behind him. Bond came in closer. He examined the position. Yes, the woman was held firmly against the wall by the four legs of the chair. There was no way she could get out of the cage except by brute force. Her arms and legs and head were free, but the body was pinned to the wall. The woman hissed something in Russian. She spat at him over the chair. Bond bent his head and wiped his face against his sleeve. He looked up and into the mottled face. "That's all, Rosa," he said. "The Dexiom will be here in a minute. In an hour or so you'll be in London. You won't be leaving the hotel. You won't be seen going into England. In fact, very few people will see you again. From now on, you're just a number on a secret file. By the time we've finished with you, you'll be ready for the lunatic asylum." The face, a few feet away, was changing. Now the blood had drained out of it, and it was yellow. But not, thought Bond, with fear. The pale eyes looked levelly into his. They were not defeated. The wet, shapeless mouth lengthened in a grin.
And where will you be when I am in the asylum, Mr. Bond? Oh, I guess I can do her voice of the Russian accent now. And where will you be when I am in the asylum, Mr. Bond? Oh, you're getting on with my life. I think not, Englishski spion. Bond hardly noticed the words. He had heard the click of the door opening. A burst of laughter came from the room behind him. Eh bien! It was the voice of delight that Bond remembered so well. What? The the 70th position! Now at last I have seen everything, and evidently by an Englishman, James! This really is an insult to my countrymen. I don't recommend it, said Bond over his shoulder. It's too strenuous. Anyway, you can take over now. I'll introduce you. Her name's Rosa. You'll like her. She's a big noise in Smersh. She looks after the murdering, and as a matter of fact, Mathis came up. Oh, it's Mathis. Okay, I wasn't sure who it was. That's M, just so you guys know. That's M that he was referring to. There were two laundrymen with him. The three of them stood and looked respectfully into the dreadful face. Rosa, said Mathis thoughtfully. But this time of Rosa Malher. Well, well, but I am sure she is comfortable in that position. You two, bring along the Penier de Fleurs. She will be more comfortable lying down. The two men walked to the door. Bond heard the creak of the laundry basket. The woman's eyes were still locked in Bond's. She moved a little, shifting her weight out of Bond's sight and not noticed by Mathis, who was still examining her face. The toe of one shiny buttoned boot pressed under the instep of the other. From the point of its toe there slid forward half an inch of thin knife blade. Like the knitting needles, the steel had a dirty bluish tinge. The two men came up and put the big square basket down beside Mathis. "Take her," said Mathis. He bowed slightly to the woman. "It has been an honor." "Au revoir, Rosa," said Bond. The yellow eyes blazed briefly. "Farewell, Mr. Bond." The boot, with its tiny steel tongue, flashed out. Bond felt a sharp pain in his right calf. It was only the sort of pain you would get from a kick. He flinched and stepped back. The two men seized Rosa Klebb by the arms. Mathis laughed. "My poor James," he said. "Count on Smersh to have the last word." The tongue of dirty steel had withdrawn into the leather. Now it was only a harmless bundle of old woman that was being lifted into the basket. Mathis watched the lid being secured. He turned to Bond. "It is all in a day's work you have done, my friend," he said. "But you look tired. Go back to the embassy and have a rest, because this evening we must have dinner together. The best dinner in Paris, and I will find the loveliest girl to go with." Numbness was creeping up Bond's body. He felt very cold. He lifted his hand to brush back the comma of hair over his right eye. There was no feeling in his fingers. They seemed as big as cucumbers. His hand fell heavily to his side. Breathing became difficult. Bond sighed to the depths of his lungs. He clenched his jaws and half closed his eyes, as people do when they want to hide their drunkenness. Through his eyelashes he watched the basket being carried to the door. He prized his eyes open. Desperately he focused Mathis. "I shan't need a girl, Renee," he said thickly. Now
He had to grasp for breath. Again, his hand moved up towards his cold face. He had an impression of Mathis starting toward him. Bond felt his knees begin to buckle. He said, or thought he said, "I've already got the loveliest." Bond pivoted slowly on his heel and crashed headlong to the wine red floor. Oh no! And that's the end! That's the end of the book! Oh no, did Bond die? Oh, well, actually, no, I don't think so. I don't think this is the last book in the series. But, dang! What a way to end the story. Wait, so then what happens to Tatiana and all them? Like, what, she. I guess she would have to stay in England because they would just kill her in Russia since, like, she left with Bond and, like, everything has been exposed. Bond didn't die, and they didn't blow up from the cipher. They lost Rosa. Like, everything's completely destroyed for the Russians in this book. But man, that was good. What did you guys think about it? Let me know, cause I had fun reading it. It was a good, definitely a good read. I only wish I was able to finish it sooner for all of you. But I will be ending the stream here. Just barely under 3 hours. Oh my gosh. I'm going to bed late. But I will be back on Tuesday. I'm going to be finishing up Uncharted. And then on Wednesday, I will be finishing, or not finishing, I will begin playing. I think I'm going to be starting the Resident Evil 7 of Biohazard. I think that's what I'm going to start doing. Because I haven't played a scary game in a while. I'm kind of in the mood for it. So I'm going to introduce you all to the very first Resident Evil game that I have ever played, which was Biohazard. And yeah. So be ready for that Tuesday, finishing up Uncharted, and then Thursday it's gonna be Resident Evil Biohazard. But I will see everyone later. I hope you all have a great night or a good day, and I will see you next time.